Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global, where we answer every question that you have. Well, maybe not every question, but most of the questions that you have every single morning. If you have questions, of course, you can use Mokana and ask those questions there. You can vote on the questions. You can chat with others. You can complain about our answers. You can do all those things in Mokana. If you are not in Mokana, it's okay. It's okay. You can actually just use this little QR code or just go to askofficehours.global. Ask those questions. Those questions work 24/7. So if you're watching this later and you go, oh, I missed my opportunity, you didn't. Just throw them in there and we will answer it the next time we see it. So anyway, go ahead and throw those in. And let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Zach Stallsmith this morning from Chautauqua, New York. I have a school musical coming up where we'll be using 18 channels of wireless. They're Sennheiser units. We only have a distro antenna for 9 of them. Will this cause any issues with RF interference?
I believe so. So 18 channels is a lot of RF. So I do think that you're going to have to really think about that. You're going to have to test it very, very heavily. Anytime you have 18 channels of audio, of wireless, you definitely need, and as Mickey said, you need get another antenna splitter or combiner, which is cheaper to set up and coordinate the 9 additional ones. But once you go over, I would say about 6 to 8 channels, you really need someone who knows what they're doing. You really need to have all the equipment that you need, and what you'll get otherwise is crosstalk and static and a lot of other things that can happen, as you start to compress that. So it's if you have that many, it's definitely something that you're going to want to make sure that you have the right tools and the right people to work on that. So be very careful. Next question.
Next question comes from Mountain Christensen in New York City. Just an FYI, an interesting behind the scenes of a sports remote, and he's got a YouTube link there.
And there's a YouTube link there, and I did not get to see it before the show. It's there we go. So this is showing it. Chris has got it up. And this looks like a sporty again. Yeah, so there's and are we showing that? Can we cut that?
They have all the money.
Yeah. So this is showing you a little bit. This is just soccer. Now he's walking around. Can we cut to are we able to jump to where they're actually showing
I
real
can step
behind the
forward.
scenes? Yeah. Like we don't need to see this part. He's just talking. This is the part that this is where I get really good at using the plus 10 seconds. Like people like just talking. Okay, there's gear. So
I'm reading the comments and somebody's mentioning the AI
so,
lips are visible, but it's actually crazy how good this is working. So this must be a combination of AI and live.
There's gear.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So what is he doing here? It is a. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I watched a few of this last week when it first came out. It's pretty fascinating. It's in depth behind the scenes, getting to go to this football event. It isn't a regular broadcast. It was, I believe, just straight to Twitch, and I'm not sure where the money came from to call this crew in, but it's pretty spectacular because it's 4K. They show just audio. They show getting fiber lines from trucks and how moving the trucks into position, and just the pre-prep on this is amazing. And haven't had the luxury of going here to our local stadium and going on tour with Bo Cordell and seeing all the trucks and getting to do almost the same thing. It's really a neat 30-minute sneak peek behind the scenes as to how this all comes together. It's a lot of money and a lot of technology. I mean, you're just seeing the best of the best with these guys, huge switchers. I can't remember if that one was a Grass Valley or a Ross, but it's definitely worth watching. I only got about 60% through and had to jump. I want to finish watching it.
I think that when people think about live, they think, oh, it's easy and you can just throw it together, and it wouldn't be that hard to do something that I can do this with my laptop, and you're kind of like, well, there's a lot of hardware in there that makes that work, and an incredible amount of coordination. And I will say that, like, for instance, when you look at these, the sports camera operators are like top of the heap. Like their abilities to manage, moving. Oftentimes when we're doing shows and we really need them to work, we try to find sports, like we want sports reels because we know they can handle almost anything in front of them. And so anyway, it's looks good. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says Reddit has made licensing its data for large language model training part of its business strategy. Could you see hybrid large language models that run on the user's computer locally but are constantly updated with new training data from outside sources?
Probably not. I mean, I think that most people's models are going to be doing it in the cloud. It'll be too hard to deal with the users. I think where you're going to see user data, I mean, you might see hybrids by companies who want to do that, but it's hard to make that calculation. I mean, it's really what large language models do really needs to have the whole data set in front of them. And trying to do that online as well as, in on-prem at the same time would be, I think, very difficult to do efficiently. So I think that I do think that you will see on-prem large language models because of security, and because people want to really customize them for a specific thing. But the vast majority of large language model usage, I bet you, is going to be all in the cloud. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Why was the AT&T disruption a reminder of why work from home grew popular in the first place?
Nigel?
Yeah, the question doesn't quite make sense to me. It feels maybe I don't get it, but I wanted to make a couple of comments in observation to one. I was on a road trip when this happened, so there's nothing worse than being in the car relying on navigation when neither the car nor your phone can tell you where you are. So that was a little frustrating. I think the reality is that most laptop warriors at home have the ability to keep local copies of work. So most people probably kept going with their work pretty much, even though they didn't have phone connection. Maybe they couldn't do the meetings. Maybe that might have been a blessing for some of them, not being able to do some of those calls. The reality is I don't think it has any effect on working from home. What's going to affect working from home is the big empty buildings that sit in our town centers and on our work areas where companies are getting tax breaks because they are bringing people into those markets. If they don't bring some of those people back, they will lose those tax breaks. Now, if you're very lucky and you're more important to your employer than they are to you, then you can still stay in your hut in Idaho and say, I'm not coming back. But for the rest of the world, at some point, they're coming back.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think Nigel makes some very good points. One of the things, I'm in California, so the disruption didn't affect me at all. But as I was watching it happen, it did cause me to think. I am now doing script revisions on all the books that I'm currently narrating online, and so I would have been locked out of those files. So it just caused me to think, okay, these are just text files. They're not really big. I'm going to start mirroring everything I do in the cloud to a local source for just this kind of thing. I don't want to be cut off from being productive if my web goes down. I kind of knew that intellectually, but this was a visceral reminder that every time I start storing things exclusively in the cloud, there's additional risk that I wasn't paying attention to.
Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button there. I think that I'm probably 90% on-prem. Like when I work on my day-to-day work, I have some things in the cloud where I interact with other people, but it's not like I store a bunch of stuff and I don't. I build my interactive documents that I need to integrate with other people in Google Docs, absolutely. But most of my other documents are all on in my computers. So it didn't really, and I use AT&T, but I also have two phones. So I have one on Verizon and one on AT&T, partially because I'm paranoid of being at an event and losing one of them, and so I'm always, I always want to make sure that if I lost signal, I'd be able to have another signal that I could call out on if I needed to. So it is interesting that most of us don't have, I don't have a landline, so I wouldn't know how to, it would definitely be an issue. I mean, I still have internet, so I'm on Comcast, so it doesn't, I would have still been able to make VoIP calls or whatever. So I think that it's not that big of a deal. As far as Nigel's comment coming back, I do think that we are going to have people, there's a lot of pressure from companies to go back. I think that the question is what they're going to be doing with those buildings after this summer. This summer is the big, there's a lot of debt that's coming up, that's becoming, coming to term. And that was all, bought or leased by or borrowed for when the rates were much lower. so anyway, so I think that, we're in for a kind of a wild ride in some of the cities. I do think there's a lot of opportunities to reuse those buildings. I actually would beg to differ with Nigel. I think Nigel's right that in the midterm, people are going to get forced to go back to the office. The problem is you have a lot of people that just don't want to do that anymore. And once that is out of the gate, it is hard to manage over time. You can manage it in the short term. It's very hard to manage in the long term because now they're making decision processes based on the workers are making decision processes of their next job. And I've mentioned this before, but I have friends who love their job, love what they do, love who they work for, love who they work with, and are considering leaving because they're being forced to go back to the office, and find a job that will allow them to work remotely. For a company, that's devastating to do everything right and then lose. And these are some folks that I don't even know how those companies will work very well without them. Like what they do is very hard to replace. And so I think that when you have people making that decision, like everything's great except I have to come back to the office, and they're making the decision of looking for other work, pretty complicated for companies to survive that over a long period of time. I think Nigel's 100% correct. In the next 5 years, there'll be a lot of pressure to come back. But as these technologies get better, as the online technologies get better, and now that people are looking for jobs specifically as remote, that's published now on LinkedIn on every show. Is it on-prem? Is it remote? Is it whatever? And people are looking for that remote sign. That there's a bleed out that happens there that's going to be really hard for companies to manage over time. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Nigel, it never occurred to me the tax breaks that big companies get and that being a thing. I think I saw just the other day, I may have even sent it to you, Alex. It was a YouTube short of a guy going through the corporate response from 2020 to 2024 about, of course you can stay at home. Oh, you should probably come back a little bit. We need you back. And it's the whole thing is crazy. And when you talk about the disruption thing, I mean, it really, I don't know if I'm just, becoming a doomsday prepper or something, but this whole idea of, the CME, the EMP, like there will be a day when all this comes to an end and will my truck run? I don't know. I don't understand that. But I watched this. How many questions do we have? I watched this crazy long advertising video that I'd love to talk about someday about, like, you need to be ready and have you seen these videos? Cut me off if you want. Have you seen these videos? The script is always the same.
Yeah. Is it Adam from 11 Labs?
No. Listen, I have it's an on-camera talent.
Uh-huh.
I have something to tell you. It's very scary. You need to listen. Let me give you some background. I'm going to give you an answer later, but before I give you the answer,
that's the model.
And but you can't fast forward it.
Yeah. That's how they.
And there's no time indicator to say how much more do I have to watch. And I finally got through to the end of.
You got to the end.
I did, and it was
buy Snickers.
It was no. It was a book. Buy my book, and I'll teach you how to survive the end of the world.
Buy Snickers because they'll last forever. Like you can survive on Snickers for a long time.
Pull back from the humor. But it was.
I am actually trying to pull back from the craziness.
Okay.
All right. Good, Nigel.
Yeah, I was going to say, lad, I always get to those videos when it's the secret to how I can lose 30 pounds, but I never get to the end of the video. Even before COVID happened, remote management is not an employee challenge, it's a management challenge. It's really about how does the management work and how do you manage throughput of work and how do you know that people are being productive? Have you set them good objectives? And I think what hasn't happened in all of this yet is a new set of management capabilities have not yet emerged that allows them to successfully manage their remote workers without management by walking about, which is how many of them have done it for so long.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. Marketing via anxiety is actually something that I had people talking to me about in my earliest days of advertising. The more anxiety you can create, the quicker you can get people to respond to things. So I always take these things with a grain of salt. Yes, there are things that are wrong and worrisome. But often people spend large swaths of their life worrying about things that don't happen. And all that time and energy in between always seems to me like a bit of a waste of time. You can't tell what's going to go right or wrong in the world. If you could, you'd be sitting on a mountaintop somewhere in your mansion.
We just took this question all over the place. Let's go to the next one.
Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. Has anyone used sociallive.us as an alternative to Riverside.fm and Squadcast? It offers double-ended recordings, graphics, a virtual green room for 20 guests, streaming, and so forth. I've had great success with it thus far.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen it before. So this is what Social Live looks like. This is a platform. You can record, edit, publish, even live stream. I'm not sure. I think that a lot of times, those of us who do live streaming will find most of the web platforms to be pretty constrained as far as what we can and can't do. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't, it wouldn't work for some folks. And so it looks like it's got a lot of solutions. It's got a very pretty website. And they're trusted by leading companies around the world. So it's always important. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see, definitely worth checking out. It does look like it has, one of the things that we were talking about here, these models of, I'm going to have a preset way that we're going to do this agenda, and we're going to do a keynote address, and we're going to talk about it. And I looked at that and I get that that's what corporations want to do. It's just a horrible idea. Just so you know, it's a horrible idea to have a structured thing that I'm going to talk for half an hour and then I'm going to, open questions for 10 minutes or whatever. It is, we have the data. We had to create the data because we had to actually do the research on it. You do not want to talk for more than 6 minutes straight, without interacting with other people or without a conversation you can get away with, but a person addressing a camera for more than 6 minutes, the viewers will drop. 75% of your viewers will move you into a corner. They will have you do. They'll be doing something else. They'll be checking their email. Think about how many times you're at a webinar or at a physical seminar. How many times do you check your phone? How many times do you check your texts? How many times do you look in your email? How many times do you doze off? I can tell you a lot of you doze off because I'm the one shooting the reverse shots. And so and it's really hard for us to find, Chris is doing it right now, see, while I'm talking, but I haven't gone 6 minutes yet. I'm only gone 2 minutes. But, and if you put up a slide, you're talking about 60 to 90 seconds before you lose 75% of your audience. So the thing is that, we've lived in this little world where and we were talking about it the other day, that I realized part of the problem is that people think that folks are coming to their keynotes to watch the keynote. They're coming to network, eat, and drink. That's why they're coming, and maybe see some stuff in the expo. They are not coming to see you talk. They'll come in and they'll come in and be part of that experience for you. But that's how the company pays for it. And so basically, all corporate events are kind of on training wheels. They're just kind of they don't need to actually be successful. So when you look at a corporate event, it's really square because it didn't need to actually work. And so the event folks are going, oh, well, a lot of people showed up and, we got 4 out of 5 and everything else, but they're not paying attention to what's actually happening. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm just always, whenever I see anything like what we just watched, you're thinking to yourself, here's the idealized version of what it's going to look like. And I've seen so many shows where people tried to get on Zoom and do a Zoom, and it just doesn't look like that. They're framed in the corner, and you can't hear them, and everything is going wrong. So yes, that looked really pretty and nice, and it looks like if I buy that, that's how my shows will look. Well, they won't. Because that's an idealized version. It's just no different than the ads you see with.
If we do it, they'll look just like that.
It's taken us 3 years plus, and in the first week, we didn't look like this at all. And your point is well taken. It's not one thing. It's not buy this and suddenly your event will look like that.
But I think the fundamental problem,
hours.
The fundamental thing is not even the video or the audio. It is. And by the way, if you're having your presenters present over any platform and they're just using their built-in camera and microphone, that's really going to do a lot of damage to people actually wanting to listen to them because it's, really sounds pretty bad most of the time. But what I think is interesting is that we keep on propagating, and this is the same problem. This is my pet peeve with Google Classroom is that they poured concrete into the past, and so Google, you can't move forward because there's a structure that was based on someone asking for how would you go faster, and everybody saying we would like a faster horse, and instead of a car, and so by building these things in where you just go from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, which is a lot of platforms do, I think that it is it's a fascinating problem that we have to get out of. And I used to work at seminars, and we wouldn't allow the speakers to talk for more than 5 minutes without going to the audience. We would not, and this is 30 years ago, because we knew it didn't work. Next question.
Next one comes from Joaquin Mattis in Imperial Valley, California. And the question is, I've been seeing a lot of productions using VENICE cameras captured in X-OCN rather than Sony RAW. What are the advantages other than the file size differences and storage savings? What are the major trade-offs? And has Arri developed a similar format?
You know, it's a good format. It gets pretty confusing, I find, and the reason for that is that it's just you have so many options inside of that Sony format that you can do this but not this, you can do this but not this, and I actually haven't been. I prefer Arri RAW, by a lot. So it is less efficient than Sony's more efficient codecs, but I really think I get a better image, and it's a lot simpler. You turn the camera on, it just works. So, I do use VENICE's, but we primarily use VENICE. We don't record internally record with a recording pack or whatever very often. Most of the time, if we're recording, we're using Blackmagic or Arri. If we're using Sony cameras, usually we're taking the live output and doing something with it. So it's just a different approach to that process. And part of it is that I don't really like that format. I just don't like dealing with it. Next question.
Zach Jeffries from the great PNW Pacific Northwest saying, MimoLive stable release keeps crashing. Installed the beta and it was stable all week. Just as the show started on Saturday, it generated a memory leak and I watched gigs of memory just tick away. Any idea to troubleshoot or experiences with this?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he's running on Intel or Mac M1s or M2s or the newer Silicon processors, because there was a new release that's beta right now that fixes some of the issues that they had with the Intel machines. And so I reached out to Oliver, who's the head guy over there at MimoLive, and he just replied all the way from Germany to this question and just said, hey, there's a new release that was just released a few minutes ago. So if you got a memory leak, go ahead. I'll put the link in the chat to the latest build. He just put it up. And there was also a question yesterday, which this is kind of cool. I don't have the latest and greatest Mac, but there is a place called Mac Stadium where you could rent Macs in the cloud. And so I was just going to get this one for $109 to do some MimoLive testing, because there was a question from Robert Sabodity yesterday about recording a bunch of feeds. And one of the things that always scares me is recording those feeds and having the power go out or having your internet drop. This is a stable way of doing those kind of records. I believe you're limited to 6, and that's not just MimoLive, that's vMix, Wirecast. It's the 30 megabit per second mode that was in the API. So this is MimoLive running in the cloud, and you can see I've got Zoom running. So, I mean, you could literally just keep sitting here and adding, more Zoom meeting participants and screen share and all that. And then you can just isolate those output destinations. And then this instance that you're seeing right now is this one. Oliver recommended that I try the M.2 large, which has 16 gigs of RAM and a 1 terabyte drive. So on here, if I say recorded ProRes 422 LT full size, it says on that drive I'd get about, how many hours is that? I saw it a few minutes. 19 hours. That's for one feed. So you just got to do a little bit of math. And one of the craziest things about this instance is this just blew my mind. I ran a speed test, and this is a 10 gig connection. Look at that speed that you could get here in the cloud.
Holy
so this is
Demotes.
Mac Stadium. It's bananas. So I just downloaded DaVinci Resolve on this thing, and it took like a few seconds to download. And so you could literally give this login to somebody else, because I'm using Splashtop right now, but you could use Parsec or whatever you want, and you could download and then have DaVinci Resolve on there, cut those files together, or let somebody else do it for you, even maybe on the other side of the world while you're sleeping. So kind of an interesting workflow is to use MimoLive in the cloud and then use DaVinci Resolve to cut it up and then kick it back out, because you're not stuck there with the regular speeds that you're used to. So if you're doing 8 or 6, you could actually run. This is why what I want to test is running multiple instances of MimoLive. So if I'm capped at 6, I'll just launch another instance of MimoLive, because you can duplicate the app and launch 2. And can I pull in, for Robert's question yesterday, if I wanted to get 8 plus screen share if I could actually pull that off. So I wish we had our Zoom bots that I could.
And I do believe that.
When are we going to get that back?
Soon. So I do think that if you have, you could potentially use 2 instances of MimoLive, but you could also use, if you use Zoom ISO and you had a high bandwidth, you have the high bandwidth mode, you're not limited to 6. You're only limited to 6 if you jump internally from Mimo. But if you deliver it via Siphon from Zoom ISO, you could go up to 16, I think. So into Zoom, and then it would just be a function of whether Mimo can whether Mimo can handle it, but whether your computer could had a drive speed that could pull that. And it's a mixture of drive speed and a mixture of drive speed and CPU. So if you use H.264 or H.265, you're going to need more CPU power. If you're going to use ProRes, you need more drive speed. so you have to decide, which way you're going, in that process. But you could also with Mimo, you could have multiple computers. The way I'm about to start doing it as we get to more people inside of the MimoLive stuff that I'm doing is not to have the main computer. The computer that's doing the show is going to do the show, and then there's going to be another computer that's going to go grab everybody. And so I'm not trying to do both of the things on the same computer because I'm just trying to pull ISOs at that point. I will say that I like one of the things that I set up with the MimoLive that I'm using for Michael Krasny's show. And by the way, I'm using the beta. It's been really stable. As far as the, and I haven't used this brand new one, but I'll probably download it today. But I used it on the Michael Krasny show, Gray Matter show, on Friday. And if you go to watch that show, by the way, for and we'll post, by the way, this week Renee Ritchie's on, so we will post in Discord the link so that you can watch the show live and ask questions and so on and so forth. We don't do that all the time. It's usually a member-only thing, but we'll make sure that everyone gets in this group gets opportunity to be part of that. But you'll also see Mimo hopefully working because I'll probably use the new beta. I'll test it a little bit and see if it works. But where I'm moving to as we get multiple people, I feel like recording the 2, and I have a thing that just hits record and it just automatically turns all the records on at one time. Like I don't have to go through it. I don't start show. I just have a button on my iPad that says record all, everything turns on. And when I hit stop, it stops the stream, stops the records, everything. So it's a pretty convenient. I will say that really the thing that for Mimo that really flipped it over for me is the iPad. The iPad interface just is the key to the operation because, I have this nice little interface that I think looks very pretty and I have big buttons that I can hit on one show it didn't work. So I moved them, so I just, this was not right where my wrist wanted to go during the show. So it's pretty cool. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, one of the FCC's goals is to make emergency alerts accessible to the deaf and hard of hearing communities that use ASL, or American Sign Language. Would a text-to-ASL AI model be effective for that task? And he's got a link there.
People have talked about that, but I haven't seen, the conversion to ASL. I think a lot of ASL interpreters have not been, maybe they're not excited about it because it would affect their job, but it also, they just talk about there's a lot of nuance to those that, things can mean different things. And so it's hard for AI to do that perfectly. And now you're talking about animating a 3D, person to do those things. And so it would be probably difficult. We probably won't see it super quickly. Interestingly enough, I don't know if people have noticed on TikTok, ASL is taking over. Like there's now the new thing, we think about people dancing along, but now they have this one guy started doing it. Now there's all this really high quality video. Well, here's the thing that's interesting is I think that TikTok is about to redefine for a lot of us when we work with ASL interpreters. One of the problems that we have is that a lot of them, when they're, even when they're done somewhere, unless it's Apple or someone else, the lighting isn't as good as it could be. The cameras aren't as good as it could be. They're oftentimes not, it's not as, swanky as the rest of the show. What we're seeing in TikTok is first someone just started doing it. And now people are starting to, the art direction of ASL is starting to come into TikTok. And I think it's going to affect how we think of ASL interpreters and what we expect from ASL interpreters in the next year. You may see this huge jump in quality because of this innovation that's happening, and it is actually ASL interpreters that are getting in on it. They're building up their lighting and everything else. It's really, really interesting to watch. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, a huge thing in the Super Bowl. I was watching part of Apple's coverage because they were one of the sponsors, and they brought in 3 interpreters who were going to do, I think the first one was doing the Star Spangled Banner and the second one, America the Beautiful one. But anyway, the fascinating thing to me was the 3 of them performed during the show, and you could truly see a difference and how they had reacted to the tone and tenor of the lyrics of the song that they were doing in their body expression, their facial expression, the speed at which they were doing the interpreting. It was really something I had never thought of, but the individual doing that ASL translation for the market, they were performers, and they did a great performance, and I really enjoyed the subtleties of it.
My biggest regret was I was at Coachella a couple years ago, and Pharrell was playing, and his interpreter was amazing. And she looked like this kind of Midwestern girl who knew she's like, and her face is going, and she's doing the whole thing. And I had this shot, and there was just one person bumping me the whole time. So I was like, I'm never going to get a good video of it. But I had the shot of her in the foreground and him in the background singing. And I just couldn't quite get the shot, couldn't get the video. So I just gave up. I was like, I'll get this later or whatever. And I should have shot it because it was just the most amazing view of watching someone who just was so talented. Both of them were so talented, performing. It was really cool. Next question.
Dan Shaw in Columbus, Ohio. I have an older Canon 5DX Mark III that I've been using as a webcam, and I'd like to repurpose it. What's an ideal camera to get these days for streaming? And he's looking at video, zoom, and so forth. If you had to pick only one camera.
If I only had to pick one camera for my webcam, I'd probably pick an Arri. No, sorry, I'm just kidding. I mean, you asked.
Venice.
So anyway,
Venice makes a good webcam.
Well, and I'll, to be honest, actually, over the Arri, I'd probably pick the FR7, Sony FR7 is probably what I would truly pick if I was able to put anything out. They lent one to me, which I showed on the show for a couple of weeks, and it's what kind of moved me over to Sony cameras was just that. But having a PTZ with a full frame sensor is pretty awesome. Now, to get more reasonable, if you're looking at these things going from Mark III, I would consider looking at. There's a lot of the less expensive Sonys, the E10 or Z10, I can't remember. I can never remember. The EV-Z10 or EZ-V10, or all these little letters that Sony puts on front of theirs. But it's about $800, and my wife uses that for her events. The downside of that one is that there's no LUTs applied. So the next one up from there, you can't apply any LUTs. The next one up from there is the FX30, which is what I'm using right now. The reason that I keep on leaning on the Sony ones is that their autofocus is just way better than everybody else's. And when you're sitting here, I still, if I'm going out to shoot something, I'm still more likely to take a Blackmagic camera out, whether it's the 12K or a Cinema, the 6K. So if I'm going to go out and I have control over it, I'm going to probably take a Blackmagic camera out. I like the recording formats better, and I like the interface better when I need to move fast. But I do feel like the Sonys are, again, the autofocus is a pretty big deal, and so the one that I'm pining for, if I can save up enough money, is really the Sony LR1, which is a full frame sensor that is about the size of the sensor. Like it's like two or three times the size of the sensor. It's a very, very small camera that looks like a web camera that you can put full size lenses on. So that's the one I'm kind of looking for. But at $3,300, I'm probably going to take some time to try to get to that. But you'll notice it because my background will become blurrier than it is already. But I think that but I would look at again, also the 6400s and many of the Sony cameras that are less expensive. They're in the $400, $500, $600 range. A lot of those, what you're looking for, in my opinion, is a Super 35 sensor or APS, size sensor, or larger for your webcam. If you really are looking for something, if you're looking for a true web camera, the Insta360 Link is probably still our favorite when it comes to that. It's a PTZ. It's got great color. It's got a great software to control it. But if you're looking to get something that looks a little softer depth of field, like what a lot of us have here, you're probably looking for at least a Super 35 sensor. So that'd be something to consider. Next question.
Eric Strand in Essex, Connecticut, says, does anyone have experience with the Netgear Nighthawk MR6550, their 5G millimeter wave hotspot? And she's got a link there to it, or he's got a link there to it,
Good guy.
Yeah, so I've been looking at these. I have the previous model, which is the 4G version, and I've been looking to get in this 5G version because in certain venues, some of the repeaters, you'll be able to pick up the repeating 5G. And we were underground in a brand new building in the Seattle Convention Center, and we were unable to get out 4G with our bonded solution. So we were getting better a signal from an iPad mini's hotspot that was doing 5G. So before you buy one of these, two things. One is they're normally like $800, and Mickey and I found that you could find them on Amazon renewed for $189. So if you're looking at getting these, right here, the regular price, you can see it's $900. But there's this company selling them for $192. So I'm tempted to pick one up, but realize that getting an iPad mini is also a nice way to go because of the battery inside of one of the iPads versus one of these guys. And if you do, what I found with these is that if you do use them for shows, take the battery out, because if you have it plugged in via AC and the battery's in, it'll overheat and turn off. So hopefully they fix that on the new one, but there's a couple tips there.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've just been surprised at how slow the uptake on this is. I mean, we've been hearing for, 6 or 7 years about 5G, and particularly the millimeter wave variant, which I guess is better at penetrating some things because there used to be a lot of problems with connectivity that way. But I'm just really surprised that it's taken as long as it has, and it still seems to be lagging behind the rollout of most of the other major changes in wireless technology. So I'm still a little leery. I hope somebody can convince me that it's finally there.
I just find that most of the places that I could use 5G effectively are places that I can also get Wi-Fi, or I can get internet. Like I can get a regular internet for it. The 5G does have an advantage over Wi-Fi because it hops more effectively. So when you go from AP to AP in a Wi-Fi environment, you're going to see drops, whereas the 5G will jump, between those relatively effectively. But I think that's the real problem is that, as Bill said, it's pretty spotty as far as 5G goes. I think that I worked on a lot of early tests for 5G. People were very optimistic. And so while I feel bad about slagging it because I made a lot of money doing tests for 5G, I still think it's kind of a little bit of snake oil, and it's not so much that it's a bad technology. It's not a bad technology. It's just that there was no way, as soon as we knew what the requirements were, all of us that were doing the production knew that this wasn't going to work. Like it was going to go 150 feet. Like really? Like that's it? Like that's all you can do with it? Like how is this ever going to work? You're going to have to the density is going to be too high. And especially for those of us who don't live in the center of a city, you're like, well, that's not going to, it's not going to help us, ever. And so I think that was I think that you just knew that the amount of investment that was required was going to outstrip any benefit that it was going to provide. And I think that we're still grappling with that, is that there's just the density has to be so high to make it work. So I think that's the real challenge. Next question.
Zach Jeffers in Spokane, Washington. Using Nimble Streamer for the first time last week, I noticed that the transcoded SRT feeds were an odd resolution on the output. A 720p feed would have an additional 14 pixels of vertical resolution. Couldn't find anything that would cause it. Any ideas?
Good guy.
Sorry, I got a little distracted there for a second. I had to quickly order one of those Netgear routers at the low price before all you guys grabbed them. So there's 16 left, and I just grabbed one, so 15. So you better hurry and grab. Regarding the Nimble question, we use Nimble up in the cloud to capture SRT feeds, and the person who is the master at this, I reached out and said, hey, what could be doing this? And it's probably that you're using an Apple encoder. They've seen some weird metadata issues coming through with the Apple encoder. So if you're using like Larix or something like that as the SRT encoder, you can, let me read it verbatim here. It says, sounds like a metadata issue. We have seen issues with mostly feeds coming from Apple devices where the encoder isn't delivering up to spec. Add in a specific resize /FPS filter and that'll work. So there you go.
Next question.
Jason Robertshaw in Sarasota, Florida is up next. MacBook Air M1, Sonoma 14.2.1 to LG TV via 12 South StayGo HDMI hub. Keynote with embedded video plays normal. But if I output audio through the HDMI LG, playback jumps to 10 times speed with no audio. If output to the headphone jack, it plays normal. What?
Whoa. That is a fascinating problem.
Also an oddly specific question.
I know, it's very, very specific. Well done, Jason.
All of you who use this,
but I think you gave us at least enough information for us to figure out what to ask for next. So, I mean, the first thing that I would do is I would get the hub out of there. So I'd plug it straight into the monitor and just see, does it happen when it's connected to the monitor? Then I would, if it's still happening when it's connected to the monitor, I'd connect it to another monitor. Does it still happen there? So I'm trying to figure out and then I would connect it to the hub with a different monitor. And so there'd be a couple of these, like, let's reduce all the variables to what's actually causing the problem so that we can figure out, how to make that change. I would also, once I knew what that was, so I would, if this was me, if I was dealing with it, because this is a really fascinating thing to go 10x with no audio. It's a very, very odd thing for it to ask for. So what I would do is I would first, get the hub out, go to the monitor, then go to the hub to a different monitor, and then go straight from the, out of the hub to a different monitor. So these are the variables that I would reduce. I would then ping, in Keynote, they probably don't like that I know how to do this because I do it all the time. In Keynote, I send suggestions, or I call them suggestions. They'll call them complaints, or problematic, whatever. But I send stuff all the time. Like, so there's send feedback to the Keynote team. And occasionally I've had them ping me back going, hey, so what's the deal on that? And like you can tell that was something that they're paying attention to. And then they'll ask you for more. Can you send us a test file? Can you, send whatever? But for the most part, it just goes into the ether. But I know that I've been responded to often enough that I know that they're reading every single one of these. Like, it'll be some random whatever. And I'm starting, but they're definitely reading them. But when you have a problem like this, it's not going to get fixed today. Like, you have to figure out how you solve today. But just know that the next update to Keynote somewhere down the path may include a fix that fixes that thing. And I've seen stuff in the notes, the fixes in the updates. Like, oh, I said that. I don't know if it was probably me and like 1,000 other people were like, but all of us using that feedback is really important, because when we all say, hey, it'd be really good if you fix this, if there's 20 people or 50 people or 100 people asking for it, it's more likely to at least be considered more seriously. So don't take it lightly about using feedback. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it's usually not you and 1,000 people, but it's you representing thousands of people. And right. That's why it's important for us as users to participate in that, what may feel like a feudal dance, but it isn't, to get involved in that user feedback. I know for a fact, because I know some of the people that sort and deal and read those things. They do get read. It doesn't go into the ether. It's really important to participate, because we're out here, on the front line, so to speak, and we're going to run into things that are different. The main thing is to be the squeaky but not annoying wheel. Give your input, be polite, try to be understanding, give good detail like what Jason did here, and you'd be surprised.
Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Appleton, Wisconsin, on a monetized YouTube channel. What's the impact if all your viewers watch it double time? Does it cut into ad revenue or algorithm recommendations?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I know who to ask though, so let me think about that a little bit. But hold on.
You're robbing from all these content creators, Alex.
I don't know.
Watching it double time, you're only watching half as much video.
But I'm not really. I'm watching. I'm not taking any of their ad revenue away because I pay for premium or whatever. So I'm paying for it. So it doesn't matter. And partially, it really screws up 2x if you have ads. And so I don't know. I think that they count the time at 1x. I'm going to guess that they count the time at 1x that you're watching, if 2x. Now, if you skip around, I don't know how they calculate that. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I'm wondering if that is disconnected from the service of the file to you, because I'm so much in audiobooks these days, and everybody listens at their own pace. Some people slow them down, some people speed them up, some people like Alex Watt listen to them at 2x. But that's listening to the file once it's become localized into my account. So that's a little different than YouTube, in that YouTube is looking for those stats on how long are eyeballs staying there. But I do know that if it's a download and then access later, it can't have much effect because that's a local change, not a service change.
I don't know the answer to that though, but we'll ask that in a week and I'll know what the answer is. Because I'll ask some folks. Next question.
Eric Strand in Essex, Connecticut. What's the order of priority when using Photoshop / Illustrator / InDesign to spec a Mac laptop? CPU or GPU or RAM? Thanks.
Nigel.
Yeah, so it's a slightly more complicated question, I think, than you asked, because I think you have a couple of other decisions to take first. You've already made one of those, which is you want a laptop, and now you have to decide on the size of that laptop on the screen. And I put that one first because you can spend $5,000 speccing one of these things out, and probably most of what you want to do will work on a fairly low-powered M1 or even M2. But if you want the 16-inch, then you've really already made a CPU decision because you've only got Pro and Max. If you want the 13-inch, then you've made a CPU decision as well because you've got the M1 or the M2. So you've got to decide to some extent the physical shape that you want this thing. And then the sequence that you've got is actually not a bad sequence, which is CPU, GPU, memory. Although I will tell you, you've got to add storage onto that as well, because depending on the size of your documents, you may want to maximize the RAM. But remember, RAM on a Mac doesn't work the same way it does on a PC anymore. So first decide the physical shape that you're looking for. Then you'll find practically everything of the processors will work, and buy as much as you can. But unless you're permanently on the road, my advice is don't max this thing out because that is a huge workhorse for 5K video. Spend some of the money, buy yourself a decent monitor, because if you're doing documents, looking at them on a laptop can be quite tough.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'm just going to add, and are you working in the box most of the time? If you're someone who's going remote editing a lot and you're doing it in coffee shops and stuff like that, you want everything kind of as centrally located as you can. If you're at a desk somewhere, the I/O on particularly the newest higher-end Macs is really good, and you can extend your storage, you can extend a lot of things. Almost no one I'm hearing about anymore is extending GPUs. Remember, we used to have those kind of like Infinity Fabric plugged-in GPUs on the outside. These new machines are so fast and have such solid GPU and CPU performance inside the new Apple Silicon that I'm not hearing of anybody trying to get more power by attaching it to something else. So your base machine is going to be fast enough. To me now, it's all workload. How big and how many projects do you need to work simultaneously? And that's going to determine whether or not you want a fire burner because you've got to get things out the door right now, or whether you have a little more time. And it really doesn't matter if it takes 3 minutes to render your piece before you send it off to the client.
I would say the biggest thing is RAM, like by far. Like for these apps specifically, if you're buying a modern Mac, I agree with Bill that the processors are pretty fast and GPUs are pretty fast. But the thing that you want to put as much as you can into, if you're working with large format, if you're doing 1080p, like if you're doing little things for your video, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you have there. Your Mac Mini will do fine with 8 gigs of RAM. But if you're doing big files, when you're talking about Photoshop and Illustrator, and when you say InDesign, I go, oh, you're doing print. And if you're doing print and you have really, really big files, 50 meg, 60 meg, 100 meg files that you're working with, then the RAM is important because it needs 2 or 3 times the size of your file at least to hold the whole file in without caching to the drive. And so it can handle that file, but it is dramatic to go to it. It's not as dramatic as it used to be with spinning drives, but it's still dramatic, jump from between RAM and fixed storage. So definitely RAM is what, most photographers, for as long as I've known them, they just look at, if they're doing really high-end print, they are looking at how much RAM can you fit into a computer, and then they put that in. Because that's what they, because it'll go over to a cache drive, but it'll definitely slow down. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael notes this. Twitch has had to exit the Korean market because of ISP transit charges they couldn't afford. Now the Korean Telecommunications Commission is fining them. Thoughts? And he's got a link to the story about this.
Korea is fining them $327,067. That's probably what the Korean regulation was costing them per minute. Like it was a pretty expensive thing. Korea was really, it's a kooky regulation. Like that's all I have to say. Not to get political, but that's kooky. Like to charge the ISPs the way that they're charging them. And gaming is really big in Korea. And I think that they thought that they were going to be able to make more money this way. And then Twitch was like, I'm just going to leave, And I think that a lot of the governments are starting to realize that there is a limit. EU's learning this with Apple, that there's a limit to what you can do as one region. So there's, and things just get messy, and difficult if you try to micromanage companies. And so I think that, but if that's all they're going to fine them, if they fine them that every week, it would still be less expensive for Amazon to not be there anymore, or Twitch not to be there anymore. So it was a really expensive regulation, and it was the problem we all have, and I've said this before, is that, most of our countries are ruled by digital infants, maybe teenagers, but at best, and they just have no idea what they're talking about. And this is across the board, and so they write these laws not really realizing what the ramifications are going to be. And Korea's finding that out. Next question.
Zach Jeffers in Spokane, Washington is up next. Saw this post from Arri with an 8 to 9 minis in a 360 array on a specialized camera car for the movie Madam Web. I was trying to figure out the purpose, not having seen the movie yet.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, at the last NAB, we got to see one of these rigs, and here's kind of what it looked like. There's Bill, and there's Jeffrey Powers and I, and we're inside of this car, and you can see this background at Caesar's Palace, I believe, that we're going by, and that background plate was shot with one of those. 9 of those cameras. So you can see the LED wall there, and that's what that 9 array produces, is the ability to have your car inside of a studio and get the shots that you want to get at a later date. You don't have to worry about weather. You don't have to worry about blocking traffic or any of that. You just use the picture car, and then you record all this stuff on a different time on the setups. So that's how that works.
Good, Bill.
So that is a perfect use, and I think that's really cool. The background plate, what you're seeing behind it, was shot by the 9 array, so that no matter which way the camera points, you have the correct background for that. The other thing is the traditional matrix kind of special effect where you have a subject in the center, and you want to be able to seamlessly cut to various 360-degree views of that. That is a little trickier to shoot, certainly, but both of those are uses for a circular array like that where you cover the whole field.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Hot Springs, Arkansas. Comment. London-based event tech startup Hopin, which shot to a $5.65 billion valuation in 2021, just a year after launching, is entering liquidation for its UK parent company as it moves its headquarters to Delaware in the U.S. So a bit of news.
Yeah, you have to jump on these things. It's not always going to work. You think that you have something, you go full in. I think the biggest problem with Hopin, as I looked at it, it was trying to move the past into the future. It's like we can produce your event the way you've always produced it online, and you don't get any of the advantages of being online. You just get all the disadvantages of being in person and disadvantages of being online. So I think if you go back and look at our earlier discussions about Hopin, I think that my narrative has been consistent. About what I think is about that business model. And so anyway, I think that they're going to have to pivot, and did they sell off StreamYard, or is it StreamYard still part of the Hopin group? Didn't they buy StreamYard when they were worth lots of money? I'm not sure. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. Where would you go to find expert AI prompt writers, and how much should they cost?
So much. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, the conundrum here is, when are the expert AI prompt writers going to be supplanted by AI? So yeah, it's the weirdest thing. Right now, individuals have to knock out these complicated prompts to try to get specific results out of things. But that's the kind of thing that you would think AI would be able to start modeling and start making the prompts simpler in order to get close to the same results of a complex prompt that you would need a specialist to write. It's a weird lizard eating its own tail thing to me.
Yeah, I think the problem, I mean, the issue is that like when someone says, "Hey, can you just do an event for me?" I'm like, "Okay, what do you want to do?" "Well, I don't know. We're going to do an event. We're going to have some people." And you're like, "Okay, well, I mean, that's like giving AI a short prompt. Like, I just want an event. Like, give me an event that's blue, or give me an event for corporate." Okay, so what are you going to talk about? How are you going to do it? And what are you going to look at? And so maybe AI needs to ask questions or something like that. But the bottom line is that a prompt operator, when there is a, go back and watch the TV show ER, which was based on, they had lots of doctors that were, advising them and everything else, and listen to them as they go into the ER and listen to a doctor yell out what they need. It is very specific, and it is exactly what they need right now. And it comes from a bunch of knowledge of what's available and what's necessary. And if you watch a lawyer, they're going to say a bunch of things in court that are very specific, and they mean something very specific to the other people that know what they're talking about, in here. But so if you wander into that, or if you talk to anyone that has very specific languaging, you still need that. You still need to be able to say what you need in a specific way to get what you want out of it. You need to know what you want until you can't get what you want until you know what you want, as Joe Jackson would say. Anyway, but I think no, that went right over like half of our audience's head. Anyway, so. at least maybe 90%. But you have to be able to be precise and ask for exactly what you need to get there. And I think that is much harder than giving someone what they asked for once they're precise about what they're asking for. And I think that's the challenge. And I think that'll take a lot longer than again, you can ask short prompts and get something that's amazing, but you can't get to exactly what you need unless you know how to ask for it. Go ahead, Chris.
I've been having this discussion with a lot of people lately, and it has to do with the idea of style. Like I might like it, you won't like it. And I am of the firm belief that quite often in our industry, we are aiming at a target on the wall that is a very tiny, it's the littlest bit in the middle of the dartboard, right? And we feel that if we don't hit the middle of that dartboard, like we are a failure and we are worthless and we don't belong in this industry and my career is over if I don't hit that center little thing. I am increasingly of the belief, and I could do a TED Talk on this, that quite often what we really need to do is just hit the dartboard. And I think that we overfix it. And I realize that not all of it is like that. I get it. Not all of us are doing, Queen Amidala's reflection on her ship. But much of what we do, we just have to hit the dartboard. And it's my family actually is very bad at darts. And we invented a new dart game. All you got to do is hit the dartboard 6 times and you win. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how long we play darts for. We call it sixies. We invented a game.
And I think that the hard part is that eventually what happens is you show someone something and they go, "That's amazing. Now can you make his foot a little bit further forward?" And they'll ask that, but we do end up with but and then you say, "No, we can't do that." But eventually what happens is that people have someone who you're working with has the money to pay someone who can make the foot go forward, and so you're kind of putting yourself out, like they want to do, and so being able to constantly say, "Yeah, we can do that." Like for instance, one of the things I always coach people on when they're talking about, we were talking about bidding yesterday. I don't think I talked about this yesterday, but I'm always like, always say yes, never say no. It's yes and this is how much that will cost. But it's not, never say we can't do something. You can, I had a founder of a pretty big company ask me, he said, I said, everything is just about time and money. If you give me enough time and money, I can do anything. And he goes, "Well, how much would it cost to be on the moon?" I said, "I need 10 years and $20 billion. But if you give me that, I'm sure that I can get on the moon and send you back a feed, but it's just never say no. Like always say yes. And this is what it'll take to do that. So that's the thing to kind of keep in mind. We've got a great week coming up here. So we'll be talking about splines here in just a second. And you'll learn hopefully a little bit about splines. But we also have tomorrow we're going to talk about field recording. A lot of us are in studios and we do a lot of other things like that, but sometimes you have to go out into the real world and capture audio. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the tools that we use and how we approach that. On Thursday, we have Graham Jones and Ann Buckle, and they are very into covering the eclipses. And so they're going to be talking a little bit about how they approach that. They're from timeanddate.com. And so you want to, if you want to check out what they do, go there and figure that out and take a look at what they're doing. It's really amazing. These are the experts, and we have the biggest eclipse that we're going to have in 20 years coming up in about 2 months. So it's definitely worth checking out. Nathan Schlegel will be here, and he'll be talking. He's worked on. He's a designer, and he'll be here on Friday. Worked on lots and lots of stages for events in Fortune 1000 companies, and so he's going to be talking about how he approaches stage design. And we're really excited to have him on the show. And then, of course, Saturday we have Q&A, as well as Sunday. Sunday's usually a little bit more internal. So if you have questions or comments about office hours, we don't stream it, so you don't see it all the time, but it's a great place to ask those questions. Welcome back. And we'll see how long. This is all going to be up to you, the producers. I'm going to talk about splines for a little while. I don't know if you really want to talk about splines. So we're going to find out. So we're going to find out if you're interested in splines. But I find them fascinating. And so one of the things I wanted to show you, I long ago, I wrote a very long article about splines for 3D Design magazine. And just found, the first thing that I found that was the most interesting is really that splines are not they did not originate in the computer. So we think of splines, we think of B-splines, and well, you may not think of B-splines, but some of us think of B-splines. We think of NURBS, non-uniform rational B-splines. And what we mostly think about is Bezier curves, because Bezier curves are the spline that most of us use because they're the easiest to work with on the computer. But we think of these as splines, and they've got little dots on them, and they've got little teeter bars, and you're probably wondering, why do we have all those things? And so what I thought would be useful is to talk a little bit about why they are that way, what's the difference between those splines, and and some of the ways that we use to manipulate them. So the first thing I want to show you, though, is originally where splines came from, which I think hopefully you'll find fascinating. Here is this is from core77.com. These are splines. This is a wooden spline, and what are we using it for? To draw lines. If you wonder if you're using a NURBS, and NURBS have weights, they're the weights. Those are the weights. So this is how splines. This is how you controlled them, because you had control points, and you pulled this center, this flexible wood or metal through it, around it, and you're pushing them in and out so that you can form just the curve that you needed to. So this form both for, so you can see for drawing. So this is how ships, hulls, and everything else were drawn long ago. We're using these weights. And again, we'll talk about NURBS here in a second, but the NURBS and the weights are they are actually physical things. And so they didn't come up with those names by accident. They came up with the names because they already existed physically. And so splines were these flexible, either wood or metal, or in some cases plastic, in the more recent ones, that you can wrap around and you can form fit it to be exactly the same. And just like what we do now, the less of them you use, the smoother and more continuity you have to make that actually work. Now there are three major splines, and by the way, let me pop this up here real quickly because I want to show you. We're not going to go through it because it's more than we're going to talk about today. But there is a video online, continuity of splines. Hold on, I just want to show you this. If you really want to get into this, this is 1 hour and 13 minutes. This is from Freya Holmer, and this is on YouTube. It's called The Continuity of Splines. And again, I'm not going to, but it is the math, how all this stuff gets figured out. This is really getting into what splines actually, are. I don't know why it's not updating there. But anyway, but let's see if I click up here. There we go. So what you can see here is that these are, she's walking through all of those bits and pieces. It's one of my favorite videos on YouTube. is that video about splines. So there are a couple different kinds of splines. The first one that I'll get the Bezier near the end, but there is you have a B-spline, which is basically you have points, and you're building basically a cage, and you're actually building a cage with a Bezier, and we'll talk about that in a second. So you have the cage here, and it's usually straight, not wiggly like that. And then what it's doing is it's actually, I'm going to simplify this a lot, but basically what a spline does is it starts to, interpolate. So if I go to these midpoints and I start to grab these and connect those midpoints, you start to see it get smoother. And if I grab these and grab those, you can start to see how a spline can interpolate this curve by constantly subdividing that, subdividing that cage until you get to there. And by the way, if you think about subdivision surfaces in 3D, that's just a spline in 3D. So anyway, so now you have these curves, and that's how these cages are created. Now a B-spline, if you have it here like this and you go like this, and you put these cages, you're putting these points, what it's going to do is it's going to interpolate between, but it's never going to go through those points except for the endpoints. And so it's going to start interpolating up like this, and then it's going to go down like this, and it's going to come up like this. And so in that area, in this situation, what you're doing and what it allows you to do, and why splines are important, is it allows you to move these control points around. And this isn't weight, and I'll talk about that in a second, but move these control points out, and you're able to softly move this line. If you had to do that explicitly, you wouldn't be able to get a smooth line. So this is because it's interpolating from a series of control points, you're able to get this nice soft line that is produced as you start to draw on it. Now, a NURBS is the same as that B-spline, like this, but it has weights, like we just saw. So it has what we call knots and weights. And what you can do is you can pull on these. And so what that does is if you pull one out a little bit, it's going to give more weight to that point. And so with a NURBS, you can pull it up a little bit more, and then it's going to go back through and do the calculation. So you're able to pull it towards it here to make that actually work. So that's that's how a NURBS works, and that's how we start to build those. And a lot of us build those in 3D. Now let me show you some software that does this. So let me open up. Let's grab this here. First, we'll talk about images, and then we'll talk about moving those images. So I'm going to use Affinity just to kind of show an example here. So again, when we know what we were just talking about here, we will, let's see. So if I grab onto this here, you can see that I'm drawing this out, and I am now, I have another spline in there underneath it. So we'll grab onto this. Here, let me actually undo this. There we go. Let's do this one more time. So now we have this spline here and here, and I'm building that like this. So this is what we're kind of used to. Now, here's the secret here. You're still building that curve, that cage that I was talking about. What they did in most drawing packages is they stopped connecting this part of the cage. So they, just to keep it simple for you, let me make that a little bit thinner. To make it simpler for you and make it easier to look at, you're actually taking this cage. This is the part that is not being connected, but you're building the same cage that I just showed you. But it's simply not connecting those two, what we tend to call teeter bars, but those are part of the cage. And what a Bezier does, and that's different than the B-spline, is it will actually, your curve will go through the endpoints on each one of these, and then you have this individual cage that makes that controls how it's being calculated there. Now, it's important to understand that because, as you move this, so as we can draw these out like this, but what you want to do is you want to go back, and we'll grab onto, so as we grab onto these points, you can see that we can now move this up and down. Now what these teeter bars are designed to do is maintain tangencies, maintain continuity between these two curves. So as long as that they are connected, but if you make one longer, again, I find it easier to think about when I think about these as cages. So when I look at this and I think, oh, I have a cage that is going from here and a cage that goes to here, it makes it easier for me to understand like what it's actually doing. It's calculating, it's going towards this part of the cage, and then this point is pulling it that way, and then it's coming up. So that's when you're thinking about how that works, that's what you're looking at here. And so as I pull this out now, if I hold on, I believe it's Option key here, yeah. So now I've broken continuity. So now these two act independently. So that's how you end up with a sharp edge, as you do this. And so you can again build these out. Now, the thing that most people do is when they start to build curves, they will, let me just pull this back. They'll put lots of points. Like for instance, they'll go like, wrong button here. And I am looking at the screen. This is where I need a larger screen for my thing here. There we go. Sorry. So what a lot of people will do is they have a curve here, and what they'll want to do is do the curve like this and then go like this. So this is how a lot of people build curves. They put that spline in the center. But when you understand how a spline works, that's not what you want to do. So what you want to do when you're building these out is you want to be able to control that spline without having to pull on it. It's not going to stay smooth. You're going to end up with you're going to flatten out that edge. So instead, what a lot of us do is to build these splines when we know how a spline works. We want to pull out, and this is the corner that we're defining right here. So we're not putting a spline on it. We're putting a control point on either side because, again, if we remember that we're using the cage to control it, what we want to do is use the cage, not the points. And so here's that cage between these two that I'm controlling here. And so as I work through this, I am grabbing onto. I'm going to grab back onto this. I'm going to have more control over where that corner goes by pulling these around that corner. But typically what you want to do is you're putting your points on either side, and preferably kind of in a more flat area because that's where you have these bars. And then you're defining them this way. So this is the number one thing people get wrong when they're trying to use splines is they're putting their points on the corners that they want to define as opposed to on either side of the corner to make that actually work. And so anyway, this is the basics of how these splines actually work. Let's go to motion, and we'll talk about movement too, because splines are also used in whether you're using After Effects or motion or 3D or many other things. We see splines there as well. In this case, the splines aren't defining a shape; they're defining motion over time. So, and when we go to those, you'll see this is in motion here. So what you can see here is this is what we call an F curve. So this is people call it all kinds of things, but it's called an F curve. so anyway, it's a function curve. It is the function of position over time. So it's not movement, it's not velocity. It is the function of this is time. So this is time here. And this is position. And in this case, this is the position of the x-axis. So right now what I have is you can see that I have 3 different axes here. And so as I grab onto these, if I grab onto this, you're going to see how I'm moving it closer to me here because I'm actually animating the object. And in many cases, you may end up animating those objects, simply by moving these around. And so, if I go to the x-axis here, for instance, let's see here. This is the z-axis here that I'm moving up here, but if I grab onto this one here, this is my y-axis, so you can see me, or my x-axis, sorry, and I'm moving it up and down here. And so I have individual control over each one of these axes, and that's very powerful. Now, where splines come into play are that this is that same teeter bar that you saw, the same part of that cage that you saw when we were drawing. It's working exactly the same way, except that it's controlling this curve is the position over time. So that what that means is that when this curve is more vertical, it means it's moving faster. And when it's flatter, it means it's moving slower. And so when you understand that, we go into this and we click on this here, and we'll move this up and down. But if I hold on to my shift key, it's going to go straight out. Now, what that means is that when you think about ease in and ease out, this is the more technical way of doing ease in, ease out. Is to you now are not saying, oh, I want ease in or ease out for 2 seconds or 3 seconds. It is, I want this ease out to be very long or very short, and I'm actually controlling that specifically. And so as we look at it here and we hit, let's see if we can play that out. We'll grab this, pull back, and you'll see it start slowly and then it's going to, now it's going very slowly, but you can see how but I can fix that by simply moving this. This is a very long animation, but I can just pull it back to here. You'll notice how this gets a lot steeper. This is all here, but I've now said I just want to do it faster over a different, now you can see it goes much faster. But you can see how it slows down at the very end. And here I have, like, for instance, I have this X position here. That X position, if I bring it down, see how I pull it back into frame? So now I'm pulling it back here like that. And when you start to do it this way, you don't have to have, like, I can have this, for instance, that's my Z position, and my Y position is pretty flat, but I could have my Y position come up like this. And then I could have my Y position be more flat like this. Now, what that means is that I have ease out. It's an interesting thing here, but I eased out on the X-axis, but I could actually even speed up on the Y and Z axis, so to a stop. So I have individual control over, by using these F curves, I have individual control over each channel and how that's being calculated, as opposed to, and it gives it a little bit of, and when I do that, why would I do that? Because I want to give it a little bit of a snap. So when you're dealing with F curves, what you're trying to do there is that you're bringing it up, and by having it, if you want it to be nice and soft, you have it nice and soft, but you can do little things in here in these F curves that are, let's see if I go back to this here. You can, do things like, if you can take this up and go up like this, and now it's going to, let's watch here. So you're going to see now it overshoots. See how it goes? So but I'm not adding more animation. I'm actually just affecting the position over time, to make that actually work. And so there's a lot you can do there. But when you get used to using splines that way, or when you get used to using F curves that way, you end up being able to look at the F curve and understand what you're doing, like what's happening here, and you can see those F curves. But that's a really powerful way to kind of approach that. So, and I may, because no one's asked any questions, that was my presentation to start the conversation. But there aren't any questions. This is going to be a really short show. So it's all good. So hopefully, I didn't know if it was, we test a lot of things. We try to figure out whether people actually want to ask questions about things or not. This is not one of them. So anyway, so we'll have a pretty short show today. But we thought that, I felt like, one of those things that I find fascinating is how these things are calculated and the history of them. And so hopefully at least you walk away with a little bit of history of splines, and that the fact that now you have something to say, like, those are actually weights on top of that. So anyway, so thanks so much. So there's your little demo for
We did have
today.
one question just came in.
There's one question? There we go.
Yeah, it just popped up. It's Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. And Dave says, can you copy and paste curves?
You should be able, you're basically copying and pasting the animation at that point. So I believe that, we'll try it. I have never, I'll be honest, I've never tried to copy and paste a curve. Usually I just, copy and paste the movements, or I reapply them. So at least I haven't done it in motion. So if we go in here and we go to, let's see here. Pull this in here, and I've copied the other one. And we'll pull this to here.
I'm going to think that you can only because
I just copied it right there. So that was it. All I did was select these transforms. I mean, it's just data to what it's doing. Usually, what we do is we end up copying, and they still have the same, it still has all the same controls that it had before. It's zoomed out a little bit, but outside of that, it's all the same. So there you go. Yes, you can. Yeah. So, Bill, you were going to add anything?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I often do is I'll buy a template package from something like Motion VFX, and I'll see a move or something that they did in motion, and then I can copy that and paste it into something that I'm doing and shortcut me having to learn how to do a real professional version of the move that they did, but with my own assets and things like that. So one of the great advantages, I think, of working this way is that you can find examples of the kinds of moves that you want to make and grab them from the other things that you have licensed and owned to use in your own work.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, you don't really think about it, but anytime you're downloading vector art, you are downloading anytime you have a vector art, you're downloading a spline or splines. splines are resolution independent. So when you're building something, so you have a logo, for instance, that logo needs to be in spline format, because the splines are because those are those single points that are defining where those edges actually end, and that's because those edges are being defined by the calculation, by the interpolation there. They're not dependent on how many pixels you have. So if you can have a little logo that you put in on your business card, but the same logo will look sharp on a poster, because and so one of the things about it is you always want to have vector art if it's something that has to be scaled up and be at high resolution. What it's not good at is images, and the reason it's not good at images is because it's got all these little buttons, all these little colors. It's like every pixel is different, and splines don't work that way. So that is a much more difficult thing for a spline to do in that process. Next question.
Robert Sababity in Poland is back with, what are the practical uses of splines in our day-to-day business?
Yeah, so I'll give you let's see if I can grab something that's relatively, sorry, I'll give you this. Let me open this up. Hold on one second. Yep, we got time. So let's see here. Open. It'll take just a second for me to open this up. But anyway, so one of the things that I use it for a lot is, there's a lot of people that use things for selections. So you're trying to select an object, and most of us that have done this for a long time, what we do is, of course, if you've done this for long enough to know how to do it, you're going to use splines to grab, to do tracings. So you're going to trace things out and pull them out, remove them from from something. So for instance, this one's actually a little bit more difficult, but I'll show it anyway because it's funny. So I was, this is some Midjourney, Midjourney stuff. And so let's see here. So this is our pickle, our angry pickle. So he doesn't, it's a pickle jar, but it's truly a jar made out of pickle. Anyway, so if we take this and we want to build something out of it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab onto, this is what I get. Hold on one second here. I'm just on a wrong screen here. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a... I will admit that I've been trying to do more and more in Affinity. I normally do most of this in Photoshop. I know exactly where everything is in Photoshop. So here we have this pickle. We have a pen tool here. Now, what we're going to do is, typically, if we want to start pulling it out, we would start to do this. Now, this is where what I talked about before is I'm going to look at this curve, and I might start setting one up before I get to this curve. And typically, when you're doing this, you're going to go pretty close to the object here, like this. And now, actually, to make it easier, let's just say I want to do something with his eyes, but I want to remember that selection, and I want it to be, part of the file or whatever. So what I may do here, I started doing this one, but I'm going to go ahead and, let's see here. I just want to select his eyes. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab onto this, and I'm going to start going down, and I'm going to start selecting those eyes. And, for doing, you can, try to select with yellow, or you can try to, paint it. But what you're doing is you have an editable, thing that you can actually pull that out, and you're going to be able to turn that into a selection later. And so a lot of times, you're kind of building, you're just clicking and dragging here. And this is, there are other ways to try to do some of these selections. Of course, you can use AI, but now, I can go in here and I can refine this. So I can go in and say, well, this wasn't quite exactly what I wanted. So I can go in and pull this in and out, and it's going to be nice and sharp. And so those are that selection. Now there's a lot of Photoshop tools, little paint tools. The way the pros are selecting things in a photograph is with a path, like what I just showed you there. And so, and anybody who's done a lot of this, you'll end up doing these. I mean, especially with a Wacom tablet, you'll end up doing these, very, very quickly, as you start to work. So, if I go back,
can you show that real quick, Alex? How to convert to selection from paths?
Yeah. So I think that I just, oops, I don't do it that way. I should open Photoshop because I know how to do it with Photoshop really quickly here. Hold on, raster. and I'm going to open up Photoshop.
I haven't done this in years, but I used to work at a service bureau where I had to do this stuff all the time.
All the time, yeah. I can do it in Photoshop super fast, and I'm just like, I was trying to, like, I've been trying to, like, when I show things that people can, afford. Let's see here. And let me just open up Photoshop here. I've been using paths in Photoshop forever. And so it's and so you use these to do these selections, and you can end up with lots and lots of selections.
Back in the olden days, they didn't have layers, so you had to.
Paths were a key to the operation.
In Photoshop 1.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't use Photoshop 1, but I think my first version of Photoshop was Photoshop 2.0 was the first one that I used there. Let's see here. And the biggest problem I have in Photoshop is also reorienting myself to every time they move everything around, so that's always my big, there's there we go. So if we have, so here it is in Photoshop, let me zoom in and let's see here. So let's go back to what we did here. So and a lot of times you're going to get pretty close to it because every little movement makes a difference at this point. And I'm going to have my window open. I want to make sure my paths are available. There's paths here. And so I'm going to go in here and grab onto my path tool and do exactly what I did before, which is I'm going to pull out like this. And now there's a little bit of a wave there if I'm really being accurate. And again, a lot of times you go back, you do this first. You do this, as fast as not as fast as you can, but you do it relatively. And I know some guys that are retouchers that will do this once and it will be perfect, as fast as they can go. And they're on a tablet. One thing you're not doing is you'll notice that I'm not putting a bunch of points right near each other. I'm looking for where that I might need a little bit more dexterity, but you're always trying to put as few points in as possible. And that last one is always, there we go. And then I'm going to grab onto this and I can go in. And I need the point tool, direct selection tool. And so now I can grab onto these. So now I can sit here and play with these like this. And this one got a little bit lumpy, so I'm going to pull this out a little bit. And so I can go in and start to make those selections. But again, this is going to be a hard selection instead of a soft one. Now, what I can do is I have this path and I can save it and I can do a lot of other things with it. But I can also say I want to turn that into a selection. So now it's a selection of that object. And now I can go back to my layers, hit Command J, which will make it its own layer. And so now I've cut that out, right? So I've cut that out. But anytime I want to go back and cut it out again, or I want to make any adjustments, I'm not dedicated to that layer. And let's say I'm going to U, Command U, and I might want to change the color of the eye a little bit. So I might, move that hue around a little bit. So those are, and again, you can try to make some of those selections, but this is oftentimes a much more surgical way to, grab onto those things than painting it. So that's, that is especially when you're doing something with something like AI, you might want to go back and fix things. It is understanding how to use path tools. And one of the reasons that I wanted to cover it, and thanks for the question, Robert, as well as, and for what Guy was talking about is, this is a core skill, like being able to use Bezier. I know that there's a lot of people that are probably not asking questions, or they're not, because they already know it because they've been doing this for a long time, or they don't know it, and you should. Like this is like basic grammar when it comes to doing graphics, is understanding how to use a path tool, and understanding how to do it. And most of us, as Guy said, Guy did it hundreds of them. I used to have to convert every logo. I worked for the Colorado Horse News. That was one of my jobs back in the day. And I was the pre-press person. So I basically they did the content and I did the magazine, like it was a tiny little place and I had every client, none of them had their own version of, they didn't have any EPSs or anything else. And so every logo that came in from every person that bought an ad, I had to build a new version. So I'd scan it. Now they hadn't been doing that before, but when I showed up, I would just sit there and just churn through all those logos and just redraw all the logos by hand so that they would all be just perfect, and I would say that it is a really valuable tool to have, when you're a valuable skill to have, as you move forward. So I would highly recommend. It's the reason I wanted to at least bring it up today, is that I feel like, sometimes we talk about other core skills, but this is a pretty important skill to have as you work through it. Now, let's go to the next question.
Lou Perez in the Santan Valley in Arizona. What are the other areas where splines are used?
Well, I mean, I think that, one of the things that, splines are, again, used in motion. So you'll see that, not just motion, but in movement. So those F curves that you see are used in all kinds of animation. When you're looking at a B spline, when you're looking at almost every piece of 3D, that's 3D splines, right? So those are some of the major things. But anytime you're drawing lines, so for instance, even in, one of the things about splines is that they are an object. So that means that they're definable, and you can do things like Boolean functions. So, so because you have two closed objects, you can make it. You can do something. Let me see if I can show it to you real quickly here. I got to figure out how to. I know a lot about Keynote. I do not know how to change my default theme. Hold on. Hello. There we go. So if you let's cut to this here. So you're doing the same thing here where we have if I have a shape here, put this shape in here. So this shape is being defined by splines, and even this curve. What Apple's done is just simplify it for you, so that all of this is being controlled. It's just a spline without as many controls. And so if I put this this object in here, and let's say I put it in the center like this, and I take these two, and I say I want to, if I go into shapes and lines and say subtract shapes. So what it did there is it actually pulled it knocked it out of it. And that is a Boolean function. And that Boolean, I don't know what Apple calls it. Apple's always like, let's make it simple. So unite, intersect, subtract, exclude, those are Boolean functions. And so basically I've cut that out. Now you can see it if I go in here and I go in and I say make editable, there are the splines. Like that's the control. So now I have those points. I even have the curves. So this is, every shape that you see inside of Keynote or inside of, these things are actually splines that are there. So those are, so that's just something to look at. Now, when you also, again, we talked about, if we look at this and we, go into animate and go to action and say, I want to move this, you'll see it does this as kind of a base. But again, you have, this is a spline, that you have there, that's there. And you can see that this is, and you can keep, and what Apple's doing is it's letting you, it allows you to, it just adds those points as needed if you start to work through it. Now, it doesn't give you as much control as what we saw in motion, but it still is a little, let's see here. You can see it pop up there. I'm sorry, this is set up for a different kind of presentation right now. So anyway, but that's another way that gets used. So motion, it's used in motion. It's used in tracing objects. It's used in every logo that you see. When you type on text, every letter is a spline. That's there. Next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota. What are the practical uses of different types of splines in production?
Generally, in print and in motion, movement and animation, what we see the most is B splines. So B splines are the ones that are the most. They're just the most approachable. But as we model, a lot of times we move to NURBS, and NURBS, as I said before, is a what NURBS allow you to do is you have a point. Let me make this a little thicker. You have a point here and a point here and a point here, and you're able to pull weights. So you're able to actually make some adjustments to that and then allow it to be calculated over. So you can type, and that's going to give you more control over those corners, kind of pull those weights in and out and get things to be formed just the way you want them to. And so NURBS are oftentimes used, that it's also, so NURBS are used for that. B-splines are really how when you're looking at a subdivision surface, which I don't have a good example of today, but in a subdivision surface, the sub D is actually that's a 3D spline. It's B splines to make that actually work. So those are some of the things that how we see them used. They're also used, for instance, in car design. So when you think about how do they get these nice flowing edges that go from the car? Well, what they do is they actually build these, and the Alias Studio is what I used in working on film, and you can have incredible control over continuity across the surface because of how those splines are being calculated. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, would it be possible to map video content onto an irregular spline shape?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at, I could, let's see here if I can do this with this guy here. Let's see if this will, I don't know if this will work, but we'll see. You can definitely use, because what you're doing is you're using this as a mask, so that's how so the spline is really a, let's see if I'm trying to find the image that I was just playing with here. Hold on. And
this is really where After Effects comes into play to get a little more technical. If you want to map video in there, the Adobe Suite really makes it easy.
Yeah, and then you can do it inside of, you could use these. I just don't have a good setup. I was trying to do it in what I had here, but you can also do it in, it's relatively easy to do it in things like any video program will do that. I'm having a little trouble doing it on the fly here, but you can use it as a mask, to control, what you're doing. So you can put your video into that. You can have complicated parts. After Effects can do it well, but pretty much, Final Cut, Motion, Premiere, Resolve, all of those will allow you to use a vector mask to mat out a video, to put it in there. I don't think I can do it quite as fast as I'd like to. Next question.
John Fisher, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Are splines programmable in VFX, or do they operate on variable values depending on how other physics, geometry, or generative content shakes out?
Yeah, so in the gaming area, in fact, if you look at the splines that Freya Homer shows in her videos, she writes things that do those splines for Unity. And so I think everything that you see in that video that she does on splines is, or that they do there is, they are, all of those splines are being generated as a calculation inside of Unity. So you can definitely program those. A lot of things where you start seeing things programmed like this, that at that level of detail, is really when you start talking about Houdini. Houdini is going to let you build a lot of those code that's going to generate those, but those can be done in Maya and a lot of other things. And so those splines can definitely be defined mathematically to make those work. They are math, and it's just a matter of you controlling those. Next question.
Stephen Montagna in Madison, Wisconsin. Advantages and disadvantages of different input devices for control point manipulation: mouse, trackpad, tablet, and pen. Also, what about Vision Pro? Thoughts on the future of manipulating splines with gestures?
A good guy.
Yeah, back when I was doing this in the mid-90s, I had done so much retouching and so much just intricate Photoshop and Illustrator and freehand work that my wrist was shot. So at 20 years old, I had already gotten carpal tunnel syndrome. So they, the place I was working got everybody Wacom tablets, and not just the little ones, but the big ones. And so getting that finite control, I almost completely switched over to just the Wacom tablet because I could get really detailed work done. And, you get really ninja as far as zooming in, zooming out. You get super fast if you're doing this day in and day out. So I like the Wacom tablets, but not the tiny ones. You got to get the big one, and you got to get proficient at punching in and punching out fast if you're in a hurry to get this stuff done. As far as the second part of the question, I'll pass that to Alex.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, what's been interesting to me is trackpads on laptops, because Apple at one point did this thing where if you pressed deeply, you got kind of a tactile sensation, which is really weird because it's not actually moving. And I'm not exactly sure to this day how they managed to give you that sense of it. But it's one of the things I was thinking of immediately when you brought up the Vision Pro idea, Stephen, is how when people are in this virtual world where you attach to some sort of tactilacity, is that even a word? But it's one of the things that when people really need a pen and they're really concerned with nib, it's because of that tactile feedback. And really fine artists rely on that for pressure and calligraphy and things like that. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that develops in the 3D virtual space where you're moving your hands theoretically and manipulating things. And yet at this point, you're cut off from that tactile feedback. Will that always be true? Will people wear gloves or something? I don't know. It's a fascinating thing to think about.
25 years ago, I walked into a room that was probably, I don't know, maybe 20 by 20. And there was a long, big cable that came down from the ceiling. And you put this helmet on. It wasn't a headset. It was a helmet that you put on. And you put gloves on. And you could say, I want a sphere this big. And a sphere would appear in front of you. And you could grab onto it. And you could feel yourself grabbing onto the isoprems and just pulling them out. And I was like, oh my gosh, the next 5 years is going to be amazing. 25 years ago. Like, so anyway, so it was like I just thought this is going to be the next thing, and so we're still waiting. But that can all be done. I mean, that I don't know how many millions of dollars that room represented, in R&D, and it was huge Onyx boxes running it, and it was a bunch of refrigerators that made it work. At the time, it probably is as fast as the watch right now. But I think that I think that there is this place where the Vision Pro is going to be something that, that we can build and create. I mean, I know that Meta had an app. I can't think of the name of it right. Is it Surface? Was it Surface was the app? I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but there was an app that you could paint in 3D and you could use the controllers and everything else. Still felt like you were drawing with a brick, but some of the artists got pretty good at it. But I think now that we're grabbing onto with our fingers and pulling things, I think that there's a real interactivity that's going to be available to us that is going to be interesting. And I think that eventually, I think we are going to get gloves. I think most likely, if I was going to guess, in the next 10 years, Apple will give us gloves. Maybe the next 5 that go with these. That are there that allow us to feel things. That are there, and I think that's going to, because it will. As someone who saw it 25 years ago and thought that it would be the future, it was like, oh my gosh, I would never because you felt like you were pushing on something. It was still rough and rudimentary, but I felt like if you made that feel like you're pushing in on things, and now our technology has gotten so much better, the feeling like you're working with something and looking at it, I think will be pretty incredible. To go back to the actual question, so I'm already in the software jig space. You can draw in 3D with your hand around objects, and it's literally going behind the object and then back forward to it and everything else. And when I saw that, I was just like, this is going to be amazing, when we're able to do this with everything. But what I would say, to go back to agree with Guy, is the way to do it if you're doing it every day is a Wacom tablet, a large Wacom tablet. I had a tablet. I first started with a little one, and then just kept on. They just kept getting bigger as I bought them, and now I'm kind of down to a medium-sized one. It's mostly a limitation of my desk, just what's going on. But I've seen people take the 16-inch and do really, really great work with it. But watching someone who knows what they're doing, use a Wacom tablet and trace something, it's just like that. You see them just going around it, and it's just. And then we're done. They might go and tweak a couple little things, but they're just moving as fast, just tapping along as fast as you can, like at this speed, like that you see my hand. Like it's just very, very, very fast to get most things cut out. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, at CES we stopped by this booth, Haptex. I believe they're the leader in the field. And I put on these gloves. I think it was Kyle said, turn around and go to that booth. And this is one of the cool things about going to the shows is being able to put this stuff on and try it. There was actually a cat that they had on a desk. And so I put on the helmet and, it's total VR. But I was petting this cat. And it was wild that the haptic gave you that feedback, and these guys are the leader in the industry. So this is like a $30,000 setup. And, it's just a taste of the future as to where we're going with this. Because when I saw you with the Vision Pro, Alex, when you made that line in the demo and then you walked around it and you could see it was 3D, I was like, what? I'm so just used to 2D, and you make your points and then it's there flat. Not used to being able to go behind it and then get some depth to it. So the future's going to be interesting. But the one thing that I'm curious, Alex, did you get the on the Vision Pro, did you get the prescription and put it in there for your glasses?
I'm still waiting on it.
Okay,
still waiting on it.
And so I'm waiting.
It wasn't their fault. Apple dutifully sent me an email every day since I ordered it saying, "Hey, we're gonna cancel your order on the February 18th." If you just for the prescriptions, and you can order it again, but we're going to give you your money back if you don't or use the prescription, because of course, the earliest I could get my prescription was the 19th. So it got canceled, and I have to just put it back in. Like I have it now, and so I hadn't been to the eye doctor for 3 years. I had to get a new prescription.
Same here. So I just last week went in and got my eyes checked, and I saw how sharp everything was. And I was like, oh man, okay, I'm getting that age. I need them. So I ordered for the Quest. I ordered the inserts, and they were like $49 because that guy Hugh Howe was saying, get them. You'll be amazed at the clarity and the sharpness. So I'm curious when we get into these level of detail, when we're trying to see something like a little dot on something that's 20 feet, like if you're trying to manipulate it with, whatever hand gesture that may be in the future, you're going to need some accuracy. So I think everybody's going to need, that's of a certain age, is going to need these eyes, customized eyepieces to get that level of dexterity and clarity to be able to manipulate these.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I won't use the far-sighted prescriptions, and the reason I don't do that is because as soon as I put them on, my eyes will relax immediately, and then I can't see anything close up without them. And so I don't want to be dependent on them. And I have found that if I just don't use them, my eyes stay in stasis. They're not perfect, but they're not. They don't get much worse quickly. I have an odd experience that I've talked to other people with the Vision Pro. Is that the interface in the Vision Pro for me when I have my contacts in is clearer than the real world. Not the video of the real world, but the interface of what I'm dealing with and the movies that I watch are clearer to me than they are in the real world when I'm looking at them. And that has pushed me to watch movies. I do not watch movies or really YouTube even on the interesting thing about YouTube is if I go full screen with YouTube. We're going away from splines here for a second, but if I go full screen with YouTube, it goes to the native resolution. So like AJR is now doing 1437 or 1435 or something like that for their new videos. And it just pops up as a basically IMAX, format. And which actually looks better on a Vision Pro because your horizontal, your horizontal field of view is lower, is less. So the square formats look better, but it looks super clear to me, clearer than my TV to my eyes. And so it's going to be a fascinating. And I talked to someone else that had one, and they're like, "Oh yeah, everyone's talking about that in where they work." Next question.
Next one from Gary London. McKinney says, "Have you used auto trace programs like Vector Magic?" And he's got a link to it.
There have been many of these over many years, and the problem really is they build heavy files. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, back in the day, this is going to show my age, but Screen Ready from Adobe, I'm sure it's well discontinued, but that was the name of the app that was just amazing because you could take a customer's logo that they couldn't find the vector art or they didn't have it anymore. We would rebuild them. So I would use Screen Ready. That was just one of those things in my bag of tricks because my coworkers would do what you just did by hand, and they were ninja at it. They were super fast, but I would just whip out Screen Ready, and it would give me some... Sometimes there was too many Bezier curves, and you had to distill it down and delete a bunch of paths and points just to get it to where you wanted it to be able to be manipulated. Because there is, and I believe it's InDesign now, where you can do the same thing. I think they just built it in there because we had a logo a couple months ago where my friend Michael was able to rebuild it, and I believe it's now built just into InDesign. So you want to take a look at InDesign, you could download a trial and give it a whirl.
Illustrator does it as well. Affinity might do it. This technology has been around for 30 years of doing some kind of tracing versions of things. My experience has mostly been that if you're in a rush, it does a great job. Like you just push it in, it's just going to push it out. It's not going to be as clean as someone doing it by hand. It's not going to be as efficient. And where that becomes important is we don't have to worry about rips much anymore. It used to, if you had a bad. I brought up a word that we're not going to bring up too much, but you had to eventually send this out to a prepress, and they would rip it so that it would be ready for print. And if you had really complex, if you did the auto tracing, you could crash the rip. Like it would, because it was just too many points too close together and everything.
Funny that you mentioned that word, because we had a SGI Indigo and a Cyclone, and man, we would let stuff rip. And if I saw something that was just chewing for too long, I would stop it and go back and look. And sometimes people would let those paths just run amok, and I'd have to go in there and clean them up, delete, and then run it back through so it would actually process and print.
Exactly.
The raster image processors of old. Ripped it
exactly.
to pieces.
Yeah. So the rip was a problem that we had, but also if we're trying to extrude it for 3D. So one of the problems you get into is if you do an auto trace and then you throw it. Now we used to use Zach Dow's Invigorator was the thing that we would use to make 3D models out of stuff, but it's now built into a lot of, like Cinema 4D has it all built in, and I think Invigorator still works in After Effects, but even I think After Effects now extrudes those out. So if you extruded it, you want to add bevels and rounds and so on and so forth to your logo. And if you did a auto trace, a lot of times there are a whole bunch of points that get put for one little curve. It'll just drop a bunch of points because it doesn't have the thought process that we're using. We just puts a whole bunch of little curves in there. And so you just end up with these really terry 3D models that came out. So usually if we had to extrude them, first when I was ripping, we would go, oh, we're just going to do this by hand. But I definitely did what Guy did for a lot of stuff. Like a lot of times what I would do, there's another one I think called Trace that was kind of the same thing. We'd throw it in and see what we got. Like, hey, is this good enough? If it's good enough, I'm just going to put it into the print. Like, I'm not going to worry about this. But if it didn't meet up to our standards, then we'd go in and I didn't try to fix anything. I just retraced it because it was faster for me to retrace it than try to figure out how to deal with all those little like weird little Bezier curves. And so I would just go and retrace it. But we definitely we definitely use these. But again, they have some limited because it's going to be almost always is going to be a much more inefficient way to do it. Although what I will say is this is where AI is going to become really good at this. Like AI is going to be able to allow us to build these curves and these matches that are better. Potentially, this is where I think AI will pass humans. Like it will be able to trace something and separate it out. I mean, you look at what it's doing with music where it takes, I've talked about this before, but my daughter has Moises, and Moises will take your song and just break it all up into all the components. And she uses it, and it's designed literally for artists to learn how to play a song. So you can take the voice out or take the drums out and play, do the part that you want to learn. Next question.
Robin Cutshon, Atlanta, Georgia, up next. Just found https spline.design / for splines on 3D steroids. Interesting design tool for iOS Vision OS apps.
Mm-hmm. So this is
Spline Design.
A place to design and collaborate in 3D. So this is I don't know. Let's see. It's free. Oh, now I have to sign in. Never mind. It's not free.
It's modern free.
Free. Yeah, modern free. Free is not making me sign in. So anyway, let's take a look at what this is. So this is an example here. I'm just grabbing onto one of them here and we're loading it up slowly. Here we go. So this is
looks like home design by Animal Crossing.
Yeah, exactly. So there's an object here. Let's see. Can I rotate it? I don't know. I have to sign in to edit the file. Oh, okay. They're not very good at demos. like getting someone to jump in and click is really important. Let's try this one. See what this looks like. I'm not going to sign in on there. But anyway, so you see a line here, and it looks like there's perspective versus orthographic. There's isometric. So anyway, it looks cool. I think this is a competitor, in my opinion, to Jigspace. Probably just talking about an object. The thing Jigspace does is it lets you animate things from different states. It's like it'll let you jump from this to this to this to this. So anyway, it's cool. We should. I think that we'll figure that out. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to save that URL. We'll take a look at it. Oh, there we go. We actually lasted about 45 minutes longer than I thought we would. thanks to the producers for coming up.
Our
under
producers
us there.
came through again.
I was like, wow, I'm really in. Like there was some point about 8:11 that I was like, I'm in open air. Like it would have been great to jump out of this plane with a parachute. Like this splat is gonna be epic. And yet everyone came up. Thanks to our panelists, Bill and Guy, for making sure, giving me a little bit of room there to do that. So we really appreciate that. And thanks to the producers for coming up under us and asking a lot of great questions. And thanks to the incredible team on the back end that no matter how long or short this show is, they make sure that it happens. And it takes a huge village to put this all together. So anyway, we appreciate everybody's contribution. Our travel today, let me see if I got so many windows open trying to do all these demos here. Our travel today was 45,000 miles, 73,000 kilometers, and that is 358 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. I thought it was going to be the shortest ever.
I thought you were going to set a record and I could relax a little bit just in case I ran short.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
I had some twitches when you said rip. It was like,
Exactly. Sorry.
Send it to the Linetronic again? Holy smokes.
Yeah. I gave a little activated you there a little bit, didn't I?
Yeah, we had
what's funny
a
is
lot of
I
us
have
have trauma from that era.
I don't think I've thought of the word rip until the show for probably a solid 20 years. Like just having it, like it just came out of my mouth. I was like, oh yeah, we used to have to worry about that. So yeah, it's fun stuff. All right. Thanks everybody.
See ya.
Adios.